Welcome back, everyone. Hope that was fruitful. Hope you learned some interesting things and got to know what everyone else is up to. This is fun. We've got a pretty packed house.
Mhm.
So I'm going to transition us now into our panel discussion and just very briefly introduce our guests. So I'm putting in the chat their names and links. You can learn more about them and their work there, and I'll let them really introduce themselves. But we have Holly McCann, who's a vision keeper and core steward at Regenerating Asheville. We're pleased to have Sophia Rocklin, an advisor to Appalachian Watershed Alliance. We have with us Carrie Norton, founder and CEO of the Green Business Base Camp, who's been organizing in LA. I believe I haven't seen Tiffany on the call yet, but I'm hoping she's here. Tiffany Hart, community weaver and mom, who's been tending to both Asheville and LA at this time. And then Zachary Marlowe, filmmaker, activist, post-capitalist systems designer, and many other great things. He has a fun LinkedIn, so check that out. So I want to get us started here guests with just a quick check-in. We've got about an hour and 10 minutes here to spend together. And I think I'll moderate a conversation for the first 45 or so, and then we'd love to open it up to questions from the guests. But I think starting with the folks in Asheville, maybe starting with you, Holly, and then Sophia, would love just to hear briefly, like how are you doing in this time? And how is your community doing in this time? Give us a sense of what's alive. And as you do that, if you can introduce the work you've been.
I did but put a little slice of lemon in just a little
Oh,
bit of
ooh,
good, huh? It's nice
I'm going
beer.
to mute you, Nicholas. Thank you for the slice of lemon, though. That sounds tasty. Yes, so Holly, are you up for just checking in with us? How are you doing? And how's your community and what are you up to these days?
So it really depends on which pocket of the community that you're in. So we're focused on, defining Asheville as the watershed of the French Broad River, which is an 8 county geographic area that contains 3 sub-river basins. And so there's parts that I feel really grateful for that are completely up and running that allow us to have the infrastructure that we need to like keep things moving forward. But you'll go down certain streets or into certain towns in the region and they're just completely decimated. And there's just a lot of digging out, still a lot of mud covering everything, a lot of debris everywhere. Most of the rivers and streams have at least a bunch of downed tree debris, if not cars, shipping containers, washing machines, so it's still very, very real here. But in terms of the core city of Asheville, for the most part, except for the River Arts District, is really kind of up and running in terms of core infrastructure and a lot of movement and activity and things like that. So that's kind of the very high level how we're doing. It depends on where you live and what you have to drive through every day and that sort of thing.
Thanks, Holly. Do you want to give a quick just introduction to your work and when it began for you?
Yeah, so Regenerating Asheville is a new nonprofit that we've stood up just in the last couple of months. And it was sparked really by this union of the work that I've been doing in what I was calling Grail leadership about roundtable operating systems and treating businesses like living organisms and organisms of organisms. And 2 days after the storm, I just had this huge hit that this is now catalyzing a golden opportunity to really land a really fully fledged regenerative ecosystem in this region. And it's really proven out to be the case. So I had reached out to John Fullerton at Capital Institute saying that and saying, where can you direct me to like really get some good sources of funding to bring in here to get this regenerative movement going? And he pointed me to the BioFi project. So that was just like that was what was like, all right, with between this, ecosystem kind of model of organizing across all the sectors of our economy, and then the BioFi bioregional financing model. It was sort of this match made in heaven that allowed it to feel like that was the other piece of the structure or the other axis of the cross that was missing. And so we've just been going gangbusters in the last few months and really integrating with the grassroots local initiatives, the regenerators in this area, bringing in philanthropic contributions, forming relationships all over the place. We just started a big mapping endeavor. So yeah, lots more to say about it, but that's the high level.
Great. Thank you, Holly. Sophia, over to you. Can you let us know how you're doing and maybe
Hey
just give a
everybody.
background context on your work in the area?
Totally. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. What's up? Great to be here. Awesome. I've been in a few BioFi calls and it's just awesome to see like recurring characters and some of I want to give a shout out to Appalachian Watershed Alliance team that's here. Yeah, I mean, I think I've always kind of seen myself working in like the interstitial realms, kind of bridging, community-based land projects with funders and funding mechanisms. And that is indeed what I've been doing with Appalachian Watershed Alliance. I had a conversation with our ED, David, like a few days after the storm. And we immediately realized, that the water was going to be a big situation for us here. And this is a water-rich ecosystem. It's by the eastern band of Cherokee. It's called Nantahala, the land of the noonday sun, which is a bit of a joke. It's like because we have such deep hollers here, like such steep mountains, you only have the sun for 1 or 2 hours a day. So land of the noonday sun. But I think it's been interesting just really kind of embracing the fact that we are a water rich territory. And, we had a storm here, records show in 1916 that dropped a comparable amount of water, actually. But the difference was that we didn't have the same amount of infrastructure. I could go on and on about it, but, the thing with knowing our lands very deeply is that the only flat areas are right by the rivers. So all of our developments, all of our tourism is right by the water. So, the beating economic heart of this place that brings people from all around the world. They say it's the most biodiverse place in North America, which I believe. Um, and yeah, so I mean, it's been a lot of up and downs. I think most of us were in a pretty traumatized state, honestly, afterwards. It was like a lot of quick organizing. Actually, there was a great graphic going online. I wonder if anyone can find it, like the hero's journey after disaster, where you basically just, kick straight into this kind of hyper adrenaline. I can lift a four-wheeler off of somebody, like totally Superman situation. And then you start to slip into long-term concern, jobs aren't coming back. And I think we've all been feeling that in different ways, but it's been beautiful to actually have, the ruins of Appalachia, of Southern Appalachia, just be snowed on and rained on. And we're all kind of anticipating spring and all of the work we're going to be doing with cleanups. And so I can go on more about our work, but yeah, very long story short, it's been a real journey. It's been an honor to be a part of it. Yeah. And also like I've been working in, systems. I work with another organization called Ma Earth, which is a dear friend and partner of the BioFi project. And, so we're working on kind of more systemic and structural approaches to resilience and regeneration. And, I think just on an individual level, really being able to marry deep personal knowledge of, keystone species and what are the plants that are going to regenerate our earth here with that kind of bigger picture work sustains me in this work. Just really blending those two life ways. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Sophia. Yeah, I love that last note. I want to invite Tiffany to check in. I hear that you're bridging both regions and would love just to hear how you're doing holding all that and hear a little bit of context on your work.
Yeah, really great to be here. I feel honored to be a part of this call and just all the amazing people here. And I am actually based in the Midwest. I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I had been working on different mapping projects and weaving community where I'm at, and had some contacts down in Appalachia. And when the hurricane hit, was able to jump into relief efforts with an organization that emerged called Appalachia Relief. And I think we have some folks from that group here probably as well. And it really was just people coming together to share information and resources and just breaking down the silos and the barriers that normally exist and help to get things done and get things accomplished and get people what they need. And through that process, I've really been able to be in touch with so through so many different conversations, just seeing the needs in the community and the needs that different people have, from the nonprofits and the businesses that have been washed away, and the people that are still trying to find homes and rebuild their lives. And so what we've really been exploring is how do we take this situation and, yeah, like build back these regenerative practices and these regenerative systems and ways of being together that help us to thrive as a community. And so these emergent things that popped up, to root them down, it's, we need the money, I think, to and the resources to be flowing to these projects and these sorts of things. And so finding, in the context of disaster, the ability to really capture a snapshot of how these systems are functioning and moving, and how these funds are flowing into the communities, and being able to have that container to grow and understand more about how we can be effective as community and be knowledgeable of what's going on, and have transparent financials and information available. So
Thank you, Tiffany. Carrie, over to you. Do you want to give us a little sense of how you're doing and what you've been working on even before these fires hit LA?
Sure, thanks, Tyler. First of all, it's just so lovely to see so many friends and acquaintances on this call, some of whom I haven't seen in a really long time. So thanks very much for including me. And I'm really sorry about the noise in the background. I hope it's not too disturbing. Uh, so I'm based in LA. I live specifically in the city of Inglewood, which is a city within the city. And we were largely unaffected by the fires. Um, we had several days of heavy smoke in the air where we really couldn't leave the house, and it was very apocalyptic. But otherwise, our neighborhood was unscathed. Um, so, in the context of the immediate disaster response, the the thing that we just tried to do was be helpful to people, and in whatever ways we could. And so that felt good. Um, and I think it's just important to call out that, especially for my colleagues from Topanga here, the disaster was certainly unevenly distributed. And while we're going to hear the stories of the amazing resilience of the Topanga community, there is resilience of a different kind happening in other communities around the city, and each one is responding in its own very specific, proximate way. So Altadena has a different culture, actually multiple cultures within that city. We have, the Pacific Palisades community responding in a different way. So it's just interesting to think about. I mean, I think the through line with all of this is that, as Loretta J. Ross, who's an amazing leader, reminded me the other day that, these disasters are tragic in many respects, and they bring out the best in those of us who are in community, because it gives us a chance to respond with compassion and love and humanity. So there's a lot of that going on here. And just briefly, my work. But I see myself as somebody who has been so unaffected largely that, I'm trying to be a beacon of strength and support and help, and equanimity. The bioregional regeneration work that we started last November is taking very slow root, but good root here, and I'm really thrilled to be connected to my colleagues in the Topanga area now. And for any of you who are in the greater Los Angeles area, otherwise known as the South Coast Bioregion, I invite you to reach out to me or them, and we will weave. We will continue to weave, and we will continue to build an image for the city and the possibilities here for our future um, together.
Thank you, Carrie. Over to you, Zachary. You want to give us a sense of how you're doing, how your community is, and what you've been up to before these fires and how your focus has changed since?
Howdy, y'all. So first off, I experienced these fires in a very interesting way. As a storyteller, like far away, like in New York City, in a little bubble of distraction. Very weirdly, I wasn't there in my community. And so some wise TikToker or something once said, climate change will be a series of disasters we view from our phone until we're the one filming it. And so I'm usually the one filming the disasters, and so I wasn't, so I was kind of cheated out of that. And so I'm kind of here as a storyteller to tell the story and carry the odes of the people who were on the ground. People like Darius Fisher in the house, people like Scott from his command center. This was an amazing, incredible experience. I went from being absolutely sure, from getting videos from Darius from right here, where I'm looking out my window and seeing fire coming toward us. And, I'm in the bathroom at a comedy show, like on FaceTime, like he's like gathering my hard drives and my fiance's dresses to get it to like get, and I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna lose everything. I've lost everything before, whatever. We're gonna rebuild no matter what. We have the story. And I saw this through this sort of command center that like Tiffany is kind of like at her command center all the time and mission control, like redistributing resources, which is a really crucial aspect of the 21st century revolution, the regeneration. I just want to give a shout out to all the people here who are doing that. And so Scott Weinberg in the house had created all these WhatsApp groups for like purely social, just connective, communal stuff like home shares, events to penguins, live and local, astral zealots. Like people had made these really social chats. And so everyone was already connected in a really beautiful small town that decades and decades of social trust and connection had been building up. So, there was preparation for this. And this whole thing really showed us that being socially connected, being connected with each other in those ways where we're dancing and singing and eating together are what makes the difference between who can come together in a disaster and who falls apart. So I witnessed this from that perspective of the mutual aid command center of trying to connect this with that and getting this person here and trying to get someone to find my car and find some random person I'd never met before, getting my car and then going to helping to escort old ladies out of their houses and getting so and so connected here and there. And the whole time I was feeling like, okay, I'm really here preparing for the day after because I knew this moment was a catalyst. As soon as I saw there was a spontaneous group chat that formed where people were shipping fire spotting software in the crisis, something in my guts was like, we're going to make it. And not only are we going to make it, we're going to come out of this stronger. And like this is the moment that I've been searching for, that Scott and Darius and I all year we're hosting events around collective intelligence and community gatherings and fire resiliency and eco-village living and really like manifesting this response that happened. That I travel the world. I've been on a journey the last 5 years, really my whole life, in search of a world beyond money, a world beyond nation states and all the abstractions and centralized power structures that are the cause of this destructive crisis. And so I was magically pulled into this funky little town called Topanga, where the hippie movement started basically, 50 years ago or whatever, and was just really pulled into a community that I'd never had like a land-based connection to the earth and a place that was like, this is my home, these are my people, until coming here. And so seeing all this manifest out of that and returning here and seeing it pristine, just with scars on the mountaintop as reminders of what could have happened, was the most like earth-shaking, confirming. It was like all my ideas that we can live without money and that anarchy fucking works. They were all confirmed. And I was telling my fiance this last night about what a special place this is. That I can now say for the rest of my life that one, our house is on fire because the fuck it is. Been saying this for years. And I came this close. You can actually see out the window the burn scar where the fire came so close. And my friends Chumash and Dusty and the Indigenous Fire Brigade put that shit out with 100 fire extinguishers. And so basically, the community came together stronger than ever. And it was like this incredible response where every need was met and everybody knew each other already. So we were able to broadcast and connect and get things where they were needed. And basically, we were, as Darius said, we're living in a moneyless society for 3 weeks. As David Graeber said in Debt, the first 5,000 years, in a disaster, money and markets simply become unaffordable, and people snap back to reality. They get back to this, oh, we support each other, we help each other. What's good for you is good for me. This mentality that has been humanity as a plural thing, not a bunch of individuals fighting for their own, survival. And so we entered a post-scarcity, disaster collectivist mentality that just has countless amazing stories. And Darius is holding the whole scroll as he was this sort of impromptu sort of anarchist leader of the switchboard on the ground that was sort of directing needs where they're going, while the Heat Hawks, a group of local badasses, was driving around looking for fires to put out. And everybody was just going around like saving people's gerbils and snakes and helping old ladies out and getting horses escorted. And there were teams for the animals and there were teams for the apps and there were teams for this. And they created a whole supply chain that was literally supplying the fire department more efficiently than the city. And so more than like a nuance like, oh, the city failed and the centralized power structures failed us, in many ways they did. But in many ways we modeled an amazing form of relational connection where communities were able to spot the needs and make sense of the crisis and meet their own needs and directly assist with the agencies like the heroic fire department who we owe so much to. We were literally like cooking them meals with notes from the kids. Like there's just 21st century revolution was fought here. Like the hippie girls made a calendar of nudes for the fire department. Like that's how you win a war. That's how you win the revolution. There's just so many amazing things that I can't I don't want to take up too much time with this, but I could talk about this forever. And Darius and Scott and all these people who went through it all have so many heroic stories that just prove to us that local community is the seat of power and that knowing your neighbors is really what it takes. That's life and death in a crisis. So just last word before we move on, how are we doing? Well, there's there's like a saying like when you have horses in the fire, you got to kick the barn shut after you let them out or they're going to run back in there. And so that's what we're really focused on right now is how do we keep the horse from going back in the barn? How do we not go back to normal? How do we carry all this forward? And as I think Colin Powell said, never waste a disaster and use disaster as a catalyst to push us into the next world, into the world that we all know is possible.
Thank you, Zachary. That was a treat. Yeah, so first, just want to say a big thank you to all the people who are here from these communities and all the work you've been doing and all the courage you've been showing. And I want to follow this thread of this horse that Zachary mentioned, which I think is the gist of this conversation today. How do we leverage this energy, this social connectivity, this trust that's been formed to build living institutions and living networks that actually grow and actually survive just this small or just this short time period of immediate response. And so I'd love to just open this to the whole group of panelists and maybe hear from the folks in Asheville first. Could you give us an insight into what is business as usual today when disaster struck in Asheville? What are the institutions? How do the federal, emergency management agencies, FEMA, work with local government? What are their aims? What are their priorities? And how does that differ between the opportunities you're seeing to build alternative institutions or alternative relationships? And is there communication between the business as usual or the kind of existing institutions and these more grassroots mobile networks?
I can kick that one off. Yeah. Holly, I got you. um, so I was nestled in a small community called Barnardsville and just 20 minutes north of Asheville. And we already had a very, very strong kind of mutual aid community going. We have a listserv of maybe like 250, 300 people that was already existing. So it's an email chat with people every day. We have about 10 to 15 emails every day that say like, hey, does anyone have a screwdriver? Hey, can anyone do childcare? It's really constantly going. So that was kind of like our ecosystem. But when the floods hit, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have cell phone service, nobody knew anything beyond literally as far as a bicycle could take you, right? And because even the roads were all kind of broken. So eventually everybody kind of assembled to the local church. And FEMA then kind of planted itself there, a week and change after everything had happened. So at this point, everybody kind of put out the immediate fires per se. We had everybody kind of evacuated from their houses. I remember a friend told me they could hear bells ringing in the distance for old people who couldn't get up or couldn't leave their houses because, this region has so many small creeks and rivers. And I don't know, I mean, any small creek, some of them swelled up to 20 feet wide. It's like a tiny thing that you could just jump over. So many people were stranded in their homes. And at least from, again, the thing is that it's everybody had their own experience because it's such a different kind of such a textured ecosystem. But I think the immediate response from a couple people in Barnersville was that they didn't see any federal support for at least a week after the disaster hit. And I know that was different for Swannanoa, where Heidi, our colleague from A, was here. So hey, so, everybody had a different experience of it. And the thing with, our lands, much like I think Topanga or something like that, is that people like to live really, in very distant kind of disparate housing. So it's not easy to get to places. So, then there were lots of conspiracies happening where basically people were saying, FEMA's doing these buyouts and they're going to go, which is true, but, it's not necessary that they had nefarious kind of intentions around it. And currently, FEMA is offering, to purchase land at the market price or houses at the market price before the day of the storm. Or they're actually offering to elevate some housing in the cases where they are in floodplains. And that's basically designed to, in a way, create less future, catastrophes. Those lands will not be developed. Essentially, they're kind of condemned. And so, there's like a lot of mixed perspectives around that. And ideally, people were saying, well, how can we kind of create community trusts where we, those houses and those lands can be put into our, jurisdiction and not necessarily in federal hands, right? So those are kind of things that we're all ironing out, and people are doing that within their local ecosystems. But I think the principle behind the buyouts makes sense because we should not and cannot redevelop in those lands. But obviously it's cheapest to do that, right? In the kind of flattest territories we have. So, that bridging between federal and local support was very, very, very mixed. And, FEMA from our, they were condemning a lot of homes. So really just going and checking to see if they were habitable. So in my neighborhood now, you drive around and you see, like you saw in Katrina in the lower Ninth Ward, X's spray painted on the sides of houses, right? Or we have, houses look like toothpicks. And, we have, it's terrible right after the storm. This is one thing I really hope we can take away. Like right after the storm, a lot of the roads were just cracked like, tortilla chips. Like just no way to get anywhere. And a lot of people came in and then they just started taking, tractors and dredging whatever remained of the rivers to pull all of those river stones onto roads so people could get from point A to point B, right? And, we were just thinking about like the hellbenders, that keystone species for us, these big 2-foot long salamanders that are so precious and live in those waters. And those are all of our swimming holes. And so, yeah, there's a lot of grief around it. But, ultimately we saw people prioritizing short-term relief, immediate, how do we get person out of the house? But ideally we would have some sort of a playbook, that says, hey, okay, take a second, breathe. When we're rebuilding, how can we make sure that we have like mycelial, I don't know, particle board that's developed to rebuild quick housing and shelters instead of just rebuilding with the same kind of crappy material. And all over Barnardsville right now, you have heaps of trash, a story tall where people are just burning it. People are just burning trash day in and day out. And I hope that what can come out of this movement would be that we create a play-by-play, for flooded territories. Here are contractors that you can call that are using green, affordable materials. Because the thing is we're working, and it's not the socioeconomic differences are immense. And I also want to put a pin in a conversation, which is a little tricky. But I remember, you know, right after the fires were happening in LA, a couple of us in North Carolina were like, oh, look, they're going to get all the attention now because they have all the influencers, they have all the money. And then it's like, are we counting bodies? Are we counting houses burned? Like, are we truly competing for resources? And I just want to keep that on the table. You know, like, how do we not get into this competitive mindset when a friend from Asheville posts a GoFundMe for, you know, someone in Topanga, right, saying you should keep the resources in our neighborhood. So I want to stick with that complexity and that kind of jealousy and competition that arises, because I don't think that it has to be the case, and we're going to see more of these disasters, and just make sure that we get each other's backs like you guys are facilitating in this call. So yeah, check.
Amazing, Sophia. I just want to piggyback on that briefly, is that there has been incredible amount and influx of funds from national, state, you know, all that sort of thing. Not enough, and yet a huge influx of FEMA and state funding as well, and then also very much local, like Explore Asheville, that is based primarily in the hospitality, the hotels and restaurants area, and funded by a hotel tax. They had a massive coffer that they've just been pouring out into different to help different hotels and restaurant workers and things like that. And what I've seen is like, this is what Sophia was pointing to, is like, it's so important to have a playbook already on the shelf, because we're really playing catch up and trying to like, don't put the cow back in the barn yet. Wait, let's talk about this, you know? And so so much of the funding, I'd say 99% of it is in that default rebuild. You get funding if you're going to rebuild. You get funding if you had a physical structure that was lost, you know, that kind of thing. And so I had, you know, tear-filled conversations with brewery owners that were like, we were barely making it before the storm. We don't really know if it makes sense to rebuild, but gosh, that's the only way we're going to get money right now. And so it's just this weird, there wasn't an opportunity to take a breath and say, do we need another brewery to stand back up? Or can those incredible entrepreneurial minds be redeployed to something that they're passionate about now, you know, that does, you know, continue to add value to the ecosystem? And how do we look at different ways of value? And so it has been, you know, as we're trying to play catch up, like in regenerating Asheville, there's so much being done in the relief side, but when you really talk about long-term taproot solutions, we're being left out of the conversations left and right. So we're having to create our own conversations, mostly with private philanthropic funds and things like that, because there is a lot of collaboration between the elected officials and the municipalities and the private sector. And it's mostly around rebuild, 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 and relief, which is essential. But there also needs to be, how do we do this in a better way? How do we take this opportunity? So if we already have those relationships established, we've already educated people on green building materials and things like that, we can just hit go on that and not have to be playing the catch up and, but wait, slow down, you know, let's talk about this. But there was just a huge influx of money that got approved that the city of Asheville is now needing to, allocate. And so they've been doing sort of a let's get the community input kind of thing, but it's been pretty flat. And now I just heard that they've already set up their draft action plan, and we haven't even been able to get to the table with them yet to be like, let's allocate a bunch of this funding to like actually building better in a whole regenerative infrastructure. So it's happening fast, and you know, to the extent that communities can already have these playbooks and relationships and education in place, it would be tremendously helpful. And that's what we had a great call yesterday with Carrie, that I was like, I can shortcut a lot of your funding, like, things. I'll share my Canva whiteboard with you, and these are all the different players. And Tiffany was sharing spreadsheets and databases with her. And I had somebody reach out a month or so ago, telling me, it might have even been you, Daniel, from Tomaso, telling me that there was a whole workshop being done at an undergrad college in upstate New York. And it was entitled, We All Live in Asheville Now. This was before the fires in LA. But it was really, I think people are now starting to really like, okay, we really need to do something. So this disaster really catalyzed the regenerators in a massive way. There's been incredible collaboration and coalescing in a huge way. It's just the funding side is still very skewed toward build back in the old way.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. I'm noticing most of the.
Zachary, can I pause you just for 1 second? I just want to take like a 2 minute timeout, just to help us move forward with the rest of this call. There's been some chatter in the chat, and I see that you've been responding. I've also gotten some messages personally to me that other people haven't been able to see. Um, just sorry. Just about the impact of the whole comment about the nudes. And so I'm not going to try to address that here in any way. I just want to bring that to your attention that it's had an impact on the space. And I'll offer an invitation after this call to potentially connect you with the folks that it has had impact. But I want to give us a chance to focus back in on the purpose of our call today. And I didn't feel comfortable moving forward without saying this. So thank you for everyone who brought it to my attention, and thanks for the chat about it. But my request is that from this moment on, we move forward with the purpose of this call, and I can facilitate connection, facilitate space on that later if that's wanted. But just to serve why everyone's here, I want to keep us focused on this. So I know that may be unwelcome for some folks who want to talk about it, but I'm going to hold that for now. So go ahead, Zachary, and then we'll
I
look.
could just say a really quick thing about that. That yeah, this is a fifth dimensional love fair. That the revolution is going to take every single kind of person giving love in their way. That like for the people who were risking their lives to put out these fires, that made a huge difference. And for the people who were out of their community or were sheltering and didn't feel they could help and give back, that made a huge difference to them to be able to say, I'm going to give back in this way. I'm going to give something precious to myself as a gift to these people who are risking their lives to save our community. And so, yeah, I mean, fire, disaster, new systems, new worlds, that's going to be challenging to our value system in a lot of different ways. And I think
Zachary,
most,
Zachary,
yes.
I want to hear your thoughts on this and at another time. I don't think
Okay,
that.
okay. Anyway, I was going to say basically the relief efforts seem to be going more toward property than toward people, and more toward individuals with loss than into the community effort. And I think that's one of the big question marks for me in the BioFi space and in the idea of a bioregional financing facility to allow us to collect those donations into things that actually serve the soil of the community rather than just individuals who lost a house or property or this or that. I know for just speaking, to our own community, many of the people who risk their lives and work the hardest to save the community are the poorest in our community and haven't really gotten a lot of that those resources that have gone to the people who already had something to lose. And so I think, essentially the inequalities that are in the structured and baked into the economy that we exist in are the ultimate cause of these problems and our inability to function as communities, as wholes. And I think that's the ultimate solution that the BioFi space really represents is how do we look at the bioregion as a holistic organism that can support itself, that has its own financing, that has its own banks, that can navigate the space of our own resourcing holistically from ourselves, to budget for ourselves, and we were the people in the canyon were doing this beautifully. But now is the time to actually take that forward and to collect that into more collective structures like a bioregional funding facility, like community currencies, like other ways that we can create technical systems to signal our needs and to account for what we have and what we need, and to really take this spontaneous effort and move it into an intentional, coordinated one.
Zachary, over to you, Carrie.
Thank you. And thanks for navigating this with grace, Tyler. Um, the chat. Thanks for naming that. So I just wanted to double click on some things that I've heard from others. Tiffany and Holly in particular. We had an amazing call yesterday. We self-organized to get to know each other before this call today, and we discovered a lot of synergy. And in fact, I have been, sort of dreaming of and asking for in my head and in my heart a way to track resource flows um, of all kinds in communities, a way to map that, because as I sit here in Los Angeles, to Zachary's point, I mean, and I just popped in the chat a snapshot of the California donut that's recently been published that shows the inequities that existed before the fire and that will persist if we're not vigilant long afterward in terms of how the resources get distributed. So what I've been asking for is how do we bring transparency and visibility to how the resources are flowing from what sources and into what places and communities in what format. And lo and behold, Tiffany has done this. And I think it was, I can't remember, Tiffany, was it for Asheville?
For
Or
North Carolina.
Western North Carolina. Yeah. So anyway, I am thrilled because my request has been met by the universe, thanks to Tiffany. And we're gonna now, she's generously offering for us to borrow this model and begin to map the flows in the greater Los Angeles area. And so ask and you shall receive. Um, but to, to the point that Holly made, we, there is, and I need help. It is an invitation for all of you who are interested in having the conversation with me or and others. We need to find ways to deftly and gracefully insert ourselves into the river of energy that is flowing towards a rebuild. And in particular, in Los Angeles, the headline here is the Olympics, right? So there's a lot of power and resources and momentum um, flowing to rebuilding and putting a bright, shiny surface back on this in time for the Olympics. So it's non-trivial to try to elevate a conversation about bioregional regeneration when there's so much pressure in the system to move forward and to move forward without slowing down and without asking the big questions that really need to be asked in this moment. So I just know that I'm grateful for you, Samantha, and Tyler for giving us the space and community in which to do this. For my colleagues at the design school, who many of whom are here, who have already led the way, who've already built some of the playbooks. I mean, we need each other as co-leaders and co-facilitators and carriers of energy in our respective communities to come together and to share and to accelerate and to support, because these are big lifts. We're trying to change systems, and there's a lot of inertia. So just wanted to name that, and thanks, Tiffany, for all your work.
Thank you, Carrie. I want to turn it over to Samantha, who I know has a question, and then encourage folks to start thinking about what questions you're holding and put them in the chat, especially if you have to hop, because this will be recorded and we can see if those questions get upvoted and we can ask. And we'll also keep track of all these questions and share them on the high-low post we make. So we want to continue this conversation, make sure information and resources are flowing beyond just this time we have together. But over to you, Samantha, and then we'll open it up for others.
Thanks, Tyler, and thanks to all of our speakers. Such a rich discussion, so much passion here. I think that's what's kind of underneath a lot of what's going on in the chat. People care so much about this work. And the question that's been coming up for me as I've been listening to all of you speak is, how do we connect these, beautiful networks that come together in the wake of a disaster with the work that's been happening in these places for decades often, right? And Sophia spoke to the mutual aid network that was already going in her community and how that really got supercharged with the floods in Asheville. But I'm also thinking about kind of the bioregional efforts and organizing that was quite prominent in many places in the 80s and early 90s and went slightly underground. And I'm going to send a couple links in the chat. There is a directory that Planet Drum has put together of various bioregional efforts around the continent and also some working globally, like the BioFi project. And in Appalachia in particular, there's this beautiful journal that I've recently learned about. I'm sure the Appalachian crew knows all about this bioregional journal of the Southern Appalachians, Katua, that was in publication from 1983 to 1993. And so I wonder how the organizers are thinking about building on that kind of legacy of bioregionalism, and like how we turn the energy and the fire that comes together, fire in an energetic sense, after a disaster, into a long-term kind of patient bioregional organizing effort, long-term planning for watershed restoration, and return of species migratory pathways to our bioregions. So I'd love to hear what some of the speakers are thinking about on that front.
I can speak briefly to that. So we, in conjunction with the mapping project, we're also working on a beautiful story of place. And what we've been seeing, and we saw that Katua, which I think is an amazing resource. We've been seeing that there's been waves of this ethos that have come down through the centuries that Asheville and this region has been in existence. And so, after the main part of downtown was completely revitalized at one point, largely by the African American community, that was like, we can't have just porn shops and X-rated films places in our downtown. And so they really had a collective collaborative effort. And then in the 70s, there was a man named Justin Price that came in that was he just absolutely fell in love with Asheville. He was a high net wealth individual, and he just essentially started flow funding all over the place. He would go into a restaurant that he liked and he'd be like, "Would you use $100,000 to expand?" And they would be like, "Yes." And so he was seeding all these different businesses in different sectors that he knew were needed to create a thriving economy. And so we're sort of like wanting to tell the story of this area has memory of these kind of movements. This is nothing new. It's just this is the wave, and this is the crest of the wave that we're at right now. And how do we like continue to integrate and include all of those rich stories of what's already been here, as we're weaving all of this together.
I can hop in as well. I just dropped in our chat an amazing magazine called Mergoat Mag, and I think something that really emerged spontaneously, beautifully, was the tendency towards artwork and spoken word after the catastrophe. I feel like a lot of us were kind of thinking about, like, obviously, we had flushing brigades because we didn't have running water. So we had people going from house to house carrying stream water, flushing people's toilets and multi-story built. Like, there's like a lot of immediate needs that needed to be met. But at the same time, poetry was our bread as well, and just thinking about, like, from that bioregional perspective, like creating more texture and actually prioritizing spaces for that was very important for us all in our processing, and continues to keep that thread going, as the immediate needs begin to shift. I think all of us kind of felt like, okay, like there were little chapters that happened, like, okay, everybody's here, we know what we're like, we know where people are, we have power, we have water, we have everything we need, but like the poetic impulse kind of continued and still continues to this day. So may have lost my thread there, but I just wanted to give a shout out to Mergoat Mag and identifying bioregionally. I think something that is quite different from Los Angeles area, as far as imagine, is that people migrate to Southern Appalachia for earth skills, to really come back and learn about processing animals and wild harvesting and foraging. And people come here for a love of land, and many of them are actually burnt out people that were working in big cities before, and they want to apprentice with the land here. And so I don't think it was really a forced effort whatsoever to call ourselves bioregional. It's like everybody knew the hellbender, everybody knew the pines, everybody knew the plants and the poplars, and it just made sense. So really cool to see that like we naturally inclined to that bioregion. We just fit into that bioregional framework as it exists in these kind of global networks and spaces like this. But it almost doesn't need to be spoken because everybody here really does have a very strong felt sense of place. And I say that without much reservation. I know we have a lot of people from our bioregion here, but I think everyone would probably agree with me that like we know and love the land really deeply here. Yeah.
Sophia, do you feel, and Holly, do you feel like some of those kind of OG bioregional organizers from the 80s and 90s are wanting to get involved in the efforts that are sprouting right now?
Yeah, we've been in contact with one of them, the man that I mentioned, Justin Price. He's no longer alive, but a man named Pat Whalen was working with him very closely. And so we've been in communication with him. He's like, I very much want to work with you all to help pass the baton, in this way and make whatever connections that I can for you. He's going to be back in town the end of this month. So yeah, I think that there's definitely that ethos of, if it's in your spirit, like you're going to want to collaborate and contribute. So we're just finding and connecting with all these players.
Thank you both.
Yeah, and actually David McConville, we had a conversation with him pretty kind of early on, and he's like an OG Ashevillean, and not shortly after, obviously his new ecosystem LA was hit. So that was powerful to just feel like we're really all in the same ship.
Yeah. David wanted to join today. He had a conflict, but he will be listening to the recording. So shout out to David and Spherical Studios. We have Faith from Spherical Studios on the call and all the amazing work they've been doing to regenerate the LA watershed, more important now than ever. Back to you, Tyler.
Great, thank you. Is there anything I want to say? Just checking. No, I don't think so. Grace.
Tyler, can I make one quick comment before
Yes,
you go to
please.
questions?
Please.
Okay, I just wanted to acknowledge something that Scott Weinberg said in the chat, which is, one of the really interesting things about, what I notice in terms of people's response to the fires here um, is there's been sort of a lot of activity around waste disposal and debris. And so, whether you're in Altadena in a relatively privileged neighborhood, or you're in Topanga, or you're out where Mitty is, there's this huge rush to dispose of all this toxic waste. And so it's coming out in a variety of forms. And there's a great story, if there's time to tell it, about the intervention that Topangans did around a toxic disposal situation. But I think it's interesting to see everybody's obsessed with this idea of getting rid of all this toxic debris, but like, where is a way? There is no a way. So I think it's one of these considerations in a post-disaster response situation that gets often swept under the rug and not talked about publicly because people don't really want to know where their waste is going. But it's an enormous problem. And, if that waste is polluting rivers and landfills and et cetera, wherever it's going, it's also polluting us. So it's just, I think, really important to name that.
Yeah, on the subject of waste, I mean, there are so many solutions.
Zachary, I want to go to the questions here, if that's okay. Thank you, friend. Greece.
Actually, a perfect segue to what I wanted to ask, which is about these invisible things. So, Zachary had referred to, not returning to the way that things were. And Claire had mentioned something that Tiffany's working on in terms of resource distribution that isn't just monetary resource distribution. And when you talk about waste, it's one of the invisible systems. Like identity cards and driver's licenses are also like, we don't take it for granted, but without those, none of this works, right? We got to identify the people. And, the monetary system, the ability to print currency, or the way that you print currency and create debt when you create currency instead of just printing it out of thin air, like the crypto world. Like there's all these invisible systems that are really difficult to fund, and sewage is a little bit less invisible. But there's so many things that we take for granted that that's why the default goes back to the system that we're already familiar with rather than forward to a regenerative system. And so I wonder how those of you dealing with disaster are really dealing with this opportunity or thinking about those invisible systems, because how can you do that? This person over here, we got to get them food. And like, what am I going to think about creating digital identity when I got to get people? Like, how are you really thinking about weaving that mycelial network or infrastructure, or however you think it, that would actually enable us to go to a new system rather than default back? Yeah, that's a really hard question. I'm sure you've got the answers. Don't worry, I'm waiting.
I'd love to respond to that just a little bit. I mean, I think that it's a really big question. It's the question of our time. We have so many of these systems that are invisible, and we need to make the invisible visible. And I think that because our systems are so large and so confusing, having a data commons that we can all share and take the different pieces of information that we need for the problems that we're trying to solve, figuring out how to make that story of through that data and through that information and through the stories and all the different ways that we connect and communicate and use our human technologies and newer technologies, bringing them all together to be able to share in that information and make sense of what our path forward is together as community. And when I say as community, as whole community. And so I don't know how we get there, but I think that we're doing it, and we're doing it together, hand in hand. And so I think that our biggest challenge really lies in our connections with each other, and not letting those things that trigger us or that cause conflict to get in the way of what we're all doing here together in this human experience. And we're going, as these barriers come down, as more and more disaster comes our way, because that seems to be where we are, then we're going to be bumping into each other a lot more. And we're going to have to figure out how to get comfortable and how to work together and how to work through the challenges and the tough things, and reach out to the other sides of the aisles and understand other perspectives. And that's not always the easiest thing to do, and especially in these times. So I think that basic human technology of communication and connection, I think, is the most important thing. And how do we bridge those gaps?
Thank you, Tiffany. Any other responses on that question from the panelists? Otherwise, we'll go to Mitty.
Thanks, Tyler. I want to name, as somebody living in the western edges of Los Angeles County, and who had 3 weeks of fires to the north of me, south of me, east of me, and west of me, because there were many secondary fires, often started by arsonists. We're actually still deep in it here. We had storms last week that swept a firefighter vehicle into the ocean. We had that same storm took out a mobile home park. And then if we didn't have enough to do with floods and mudslides, we had earthquakes at the weekend. And this is a very, very live area. I have friends, I have family who've lost their homes. And I see them subject to illness, stress-related illness. So it's very real and it's very present. And I really want to speak to the waste, because I think the waste story is a really important one to follow. First of all, I want to thank the Topangans, who actually managed, it seems, to have shifted some of the EPA's actions so that they actually protected the worst parts of the most threatened parts of the Topanga Lagoon, and ensured that actually EPA have been really transparent in the way that they're dealing with the debris. But now we're into the second stage of the debris. Where does it go? FEMA was very reticent to say where does the debris go, because it knew it had a political hot potato. And I now have two toxic waste sites, each one north of me, one east of me, 5 miles from my home, and people are out protesting. And the question that I sit with is, how do I, as a citizen, recognize that my local watershed creek that I've been putting years into the restoration of needs to be protected from toxic waste at the same time as the people need to have the debris cleared so that they can reclaim their lives. 200,000 people evacuated in LA. It was big. It was huge. And many of those people are still evacuated, most probably. So, how do I deal with all these conflicting issues? I don't want toxic waste in my backyard, but it is our toxic waste as a society that we have actually co-created. We've co-created all of these poisons, and this is what we have to grapple with. How can we, I've been a protester on the front line, and I see the protesters trying to stop the trucks coming into the toxic waste dumps, and I'm with them in spirit, and at the same time I'm saying, but the toxic waste we created, we have to deal with, and we have to own our complicity in the society that has created it. And this is the level. And any tips, any ideas, any thoughts that anybody here in this room has to offer will be really grateful to me, because I actually think the issue of waste starts in composting my own waste internally.
Thank you, Midi. Yeah, I just want to let that sit for a second and see if there's anyone in this room who feels called to respond to that. And if not, I think all of us just stewing in that could be good. Kevin, is your hand a response to what Midi just shared?
I think so. I would just share, so my name is Kevin Rall, and for the last 25 years, I've worked with communities on the front lines of disaster, doing environmental recovery, and worked with a number of UN agencies. And I own a company called the Natural Builders, which many of you are friends with. But I think this confluence of environmental, social, and then the study of how that loop takes place, I think that the most progressive research I've seen to date is actually in the context of war. And there's a group of two different parties, one in Palestine and one in Israel, the Arava Institute and Demore for Community Development, who just came out last year with the environmental and social impacts of the war in Gaza. And it's, I would say, probably one of the most powerful testaments to how we look at that interconnected cycle of social and environmental impact in the cycle of reconstruction, and then how we look at that from both watersheds and watershed areas, bioregional areas. I'll drop the link into the chat there. Again, it's, when we think about conflict and disaster, obviously there are just different sociological mechanisms that, take place. But in terms of the planet itself, there's some really common threads there. So sometimes looking at things that are even worse than our own situation can actually help inform how we deal with what we're in right now.
Thank you, Kevin. Scott, would love to turn it to you for the last question, and maybe we'll get one or two quick responses, and then I'll wrap us up before the half hour.
Great. So, just tracking BioFi for a while in different ways, even before the name was coined, how do we really rally resources at the community level that go beyond the typical prerogatives of the wealthy that control all the foundations, and the wealthy that give all the money, and the wealthy that really command our governments? So we're dealing with Big Daddy in some form or other to fund at the meta scale large blocks of BioFi. And first the question is, are there any really significant examples of the big money dropping in a pool of funds that's not in their control anymore? I haven't heard of any significant amounts. And then the other is in contrast to that, what we've experienced here in Topanga is that our energy, our work, our intelligence is the primary resource. And then in addition to that, it's the collective field of resources, know-how, skills, experience that we need a better way to tap into. The bank, the first bank is us, right? It's the untapped, unrecognized resources, potential, offers, needs even are invisible to our communities. In Topanga, we do not have a community directory. We do not have a community marketplace for offers or exchange. There is no turnkey platform that I've encountered to enable us and our potential to become the resource and bank to our community. There's no turnkey platform. So we're scrambling. We're working with WhatsApp lists. And then there's a whole bunch of technologists over here working on collaborative technology and blockchain stuff. We still don't have something to bring into my community, not just to monetize, but to actually create exchange value from what we already have, collaborative ability for what we already have. So I'm just craving, good insights and daylight and blue sky that you guys are seeing something like that emerge that turns us into the primary bank instead of waiting for daddy. It'll be nice when daddy shows up. But hey, so first, would love to hear, has daddy shown up anywhere significantly and handed the keys over to the bucks, to the community that's really commanded by the community? And is there a platform that enables us to begin to do that with what we have, our land, our places, our resources, our stuff, our time, our energy, and our know-how?
Thank you, Scott. Any quick responses from our panelists on what Scott just shared?
No, I mean, Scott, you're naming sort of the challenge that we're all facing while we're building the plane, while we're flying it. All of these things are emergent while we need them. And yeah, they're in development and super important, and it's accelerating. So we'll get there. Yeah, we're just on the sort of bleeding edge right now, feels like.
Yeah, I mean, super grateful. Just to actually preface the whole thing, I didn't do the good elementary school thing. Praise and absolute gratitude for everything that this movement and the leadership and people are doing. It's huge. And I'm just calling out from community. And, just to add to this, bettertogetheramerica.org. Please check it out. Mediators Foundation leading the charge of 10,000 plus organizations, boots on the ground, ready to do community engagement. They're just getting the beginnings of a budget together to train facilitators and catalysts of community civic hubs. This is a big deal. This is like taking community intelligence into community, and they've got the network to be able to enable it. They don't have a toolkit yet. They don't have finance or fundraising or grant application tools yet. It's all early stage. That movement needs infrastructure so badly, and the infrastructure to rally regional and local finance. And it will be the vehicle to do that, because you're going to have these local engagement people saying, hey, we need funds for engagement. Oh, here's our next priority. We need funds to act and deliberate on that priority. Right? That's the beginning to me of powerful community wealth, is like our coordination and recognizing our own internal capacity to identify and pursue our own priorities. And then the funds will be attracted to those projects.
Thank you, Scott.
And the institutions realize that they need us, that they need the collaborative power of the people to do this. And I think that's going to be becoming more and more apparent. And yeah.
Beautiful. Well,
I didn't catch the name of that organization that you were mentioning, Scott.
bettertogetheramerica.org.
In the chat, exactly.
In the chat. Thanks for asking, Jeannie. I'm going to land this plane. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Zachary. And thank you, all the other folks who I don't know, who I know are in your communities organizing, from whether that's Asheville or LA or elsewhere. Thank you for being here. Thanks for participating in this community. I put a couple links in the chat above, and I'm sharing more here just for background information on our high-low community of practice. Scott, some of the technology challenges you were mentioning, we're going to be talking about at our next event on March 19th, where we dive into high-low. Definitely not the panacea that is going to fix all these challenges, but they're putting in some amazing work and they're doing a whole redesign and relaunch that we'll get to check out. And if you want to add these events to your calendar, the link's there. And just to follow along with what we're doing as a BioFi project, I have a link there to our cultivator program where we're working with 21 teams across the Americas, including Holly and her colleagues. So check that out. And then just a last note, if you have any feedback for me or this space as a whole about today, I warmly welcome that. Anything to do with how I held the space or just appreciations or requests, feel free to bring that my way. I'm putting my email in the chat. And I think that's it, unless Samantha, you got any last word?
No, thanks everyone for joining us today. I learned a lot, and we'll share the recording and all of the rich links that were shared here in the chat. Thanks everyone for contributing.
Great. It would be lovely to have y'all come off mute and say farewell.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all.